And in the meantime, right now, let's take a deeper dive into what's at stake with this election. I want to check in with Dr. Stephen Farnsworth. He's the professor of political science and international affairs at the University of Mary Washington. Dr. Farnsworth, thank you for being here with us tonight.
Glad to be here.
All right, so let's talk about a couple of these key races tonight. We know that Senate District 29 for Stafford and Prince William counties. On the Democratic side, we have Elizabeth Guzman against Jeremy McPike. Now, McPike, we know he's running on his record there. He's represented this district for some years, whereas you have Delegate Guzman, who's saying that, Senate Democrats in Virginia have missed a few big opportunities. I know this race catches your eye. You're paying very close attention to it. Why?
Well, I think that one of the key things to look at in the Democratic primaries tonight, in this race and in several other races in Northern Virginia, is this idea of an ideological redefinition of the Democratic Party. Historically, Democrats have been kind of moderate. They haven't wanted to be too liberal in terms of their public presentation because of concern that Republicans might end up winning if the Democratic Party is perceived as too far to the left. A new generation of candidates, people who really got started during the Trump years, including Delegate Guzman, are really looking to see the Democratic Party move in a more liberal direction, a more aggressive direction. And so one of the key things that we'll be seeing as we look at the results in this race and other Democratic primaries across Northern Virginia is whether the primary voters are really going to be redefining the Democratic Party as a more liberal institution, particularly in Northern Virginia.
Yeah, it gets interesting when you're talking about these races because they agree on the fundamentals, but here you're talking more about style and approach to getting things done.
Yeah, this is the nature of primaries. When you start with both people being in the same party, the differences do tend to be relatively modest. But they can have important impacts in terms of how the government going forward operates in Richmond.
All right, let's talk about the Republican side of another state Senate race now. District 27, it's Tara Durant against Matt Strickland. This is pretty interesting because Matt has been running against what he calls the establishment, which includes his opponent and also Governor Glenn Youngkin. But you have Tara Durant, who's been a huge supporter of the governor. So what could the outcome of this race tell us about the state of the Republican Party in Virginia?
Well, in some ways, this is a mirror image of the Democratic contest we mentioned a moment ago. Here you have with Tara Durant, someone who has worked with Governor Youngkin, someone Governor Youngkin has endorsed. And so you see with Matt Strickland really running against Durant, but also running against Glenn Youngkin, arguing that the Republican Party isn't combative enough, isn't conservative enough. And so if Strickland does win, it would be another sign that the Republican Party is also moving away from the center.
Yeah, so a lot to take away from this. And, Dr. Strathmore, since this is the first primary since political district maps were redrawn, how much impact do you think that'll have on this election?
Well, these redistricting contests really make a big impact on whether or not a person chooses to run again. A lot of senior lawmakers chose to retire rather than run in these new districts. Because these districts were drawn with geographic boundaries in mind rather than protecting incumbents, you really do see a very different dynamic here in Virginia politics. And so we already know there's going to be a significant generational change. The next legislature that's going to take office in January, regardless of these primary contests, is going to be a younger and more ideologically extreme party caucuses on both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans. And so we know that already from some of the contests where there weren't opposition. But the primaries will give us a sense of whether the voters are really where some of those more extreme liberal and more extreme conservatives are in some of these uncontested races in other parts of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, all these House and Senate seats up for grabs certainly makes it more interesting. Dr. Farnsworth, thank you so much for your time and your insight tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.